How engineers move massive buildings. When becoming a homeowner, you'll learn that location is everything. However, for those who would like to move but find themselves attached to their current home, there's actually an option that could potentially allow you to take your home on the move with you. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how engineers manage to move massive buildings, including a 4-story hotel. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and slam that notification bell so that you don't miss any of our amazing uploads. Why would you move a building? Now, when it comes to moving an entire building rather than just building a new one in the new location, there are many factors to take into account. And one of the first things to consider is a really simple question. Why would or should we move this massive building? Well, in some cases, the home is designed to be moved. For instance, prefabricated or modular homes are typically made at a massive factory and then transported in whole to their predetermined destination. But this isn't the only reason that someone might want to transport a building. Another reason one might move a building is to actually repurpose the land that it was originally built on. Or sometimes it's to move the building out of the way of any urban development projects that it might be in the way of, such as city expansions. And just as people might find themselves attached to homes, you'll find that cities will often relocate a historical building if the need arises. They would rather see it moved than destroyed. There are also certain hazards that one might want to get their home away from, such as potential flooding from heavy rainfall or even rising sea levels. It's believed that within the next decade or so, multiple coastline cities around the world will be potentially submerged. This has caused workers and engineers to begin to consider how they'd go about moving certain landmarks and historical structures out of the potential hazard zone. Now, once you've figured out why a building should be moved, you need to think about how to go about moving it. The first step of the actual moving process when it comes to relocating a massive building is one of the most important steps: the careful and meticulous planning of the entire process. This typically starts with engineers and specialists inspecting the structural integrity of the building to see if it would even be possible to relocate it without destroying it in the process. And once the inspection is complete, the engineers will then begin looking over the blueprints of the structure in order to determine what part of the building will require additional support during the transportation and lifting process. Depending on the distance of the move and how difficult it will be to lift the structure, all interior furnishings and items that aren't attached to the building will typically be removed. Though this isn't always the case, but it does lessen the weight of the project as a whole, so it's highly suggested. The next thing the moving company will take care of is working with the city or county to take care of any proper permits that might be needed, and then they need to meticulously map out a route to take the building to its new plot of land. This requires surveys to go around and determine what roads are wide enough and with the least risk of hurting the building or anything else during the transfer. And after the route has been planned, it's time for the actual lifting of the building to begin. The first part of the process involves disconnecting any services such as plumbing and electricity to the building. Then the workers will assess the surrounding area to see if any trees or other obstructions need to be moved before they can begin excavating the area and lifting the structure. Lifting the building requires the use of hydraulic jacks that are placed underneath the building right under the I-beams, and using a system known as unified hydraulic jacking, the jack will slowly lift the building off of its foundation, which is when the workers will place what is known as sliding beams underneath the building. This helps them move the structure onto dollies designed specifically to move large buildings. The dollies get hooked up to a large truck and are then ready to be moved to their new location. At the new location, there's typically a foundation already built ahead of time, so that when the structure arrives, it can be positioned directly over the foundation and gently lowered down onto it. Once the building is secure, all of the utilities are hooked up and the building is essentially ready to be filled with life again. Now that the why and how are out of the way, there are a lot of other aspects of the project that needs to be considered before the process of moving a building can actually begin. First and foremost, the cost of the endeavor needs to be considered as, in most cases anyway, it's more likely to be cheaper for someone to just build a new structure in the location that the building is supposed to be moved to. When it comes to the cost of moving a structure to a new location, there are a literal ton of factors that are taken into account. For the most part, buildings made out of brick and stone tend to be more expensive than those made out of the lighter materials such as wooden homes. And it's probably no surprise that the larger the building, the more expensive it will be to actually move it. Then, of course, the weight and distance moved are also taken into account. We've looked into some numbers, and it would appear that on average, the cost to move a house could be anywhere from $12 to $6 per square foot. And that's just a base price before adding in things like distance moved and other added costs. Once the money is handled, the next thing that needs to be considered is whether or not you need to have a new foundation built at the new location, and whether other work might need to get done on the land before actually moving the structure. And if a building that is being moved has stakeholders and insurers, they need to be consulted before the move, along with anyone named on the mortgages placed on the structure. This stuff is usually handled by the company hired to move the building in the first place as part of the planning process, but it's still something that needs to be taken care of. As we mentioned before, the engineers who are going to plan on moving the structures are going to have to go through the proper authorities and get any permits that might be needed for the transportation of the property. Then a route is going to need to be surveyed that will allow the movers to get the massive building to where it needs to be. This means finding roads and routes that meet very specific requirements, including taking into account for any low-hanging wires, traffic lights, sharp turns, and hills. That being said, moving a massive building is clearly something that is more than manageable, as long as the cost isn't an issue and all of the proper steps are taken. And since engineers have gotten the moving process down, there have been countless buildings moved from one place to another, and some of them were pretty massive. The largest building to ever be moved was relocated in March of 1985, and the move took place in San Antonio, Texas. The Fairmont was built in 1906 as a hotel before it was eventually abandoned. This was because of a rival development project that happened to open on the other side of San Antonio, and the Fairmont couldn't compete. However, in 1985, a group of developers still saw the potential that it had, and decided that if they moved it just a mile away from its original location, they might be able to revive it. The trip took place over 6 days and was planned as carefully as they could. The move required certain bridges to be reinforced along the route to ensure no damages were done, and once the hotel landed on its new plot, it began to thrive again. To this day, it remains at 401 South Alamo Street in San Antonio, Texas. Moving an entire building is certainly no easy task, but there is no doubt in the world that it can be done. What do you think, though? Would you ever consider moving your house onto another plot of land? And if so, why? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our uploads.